Good evening. We are coming to you live from our newsroom, where a stunning development has just unfolded over the Strait of Hormuz, raising critical questions about the future of air power. How could 12 of the most advanced fighter jets in the world simply vanish from the sky in a matter of minutes? 12 F-35 Adir fighters, the most expensive, most technically advanced tactical aircraft in the Israeli Air Force inventory, are gone. Not damaged. Not forced to abort their mission. Gone. Shot down over the Strait of Hormuz in an engagement window that lasted just 6 minutes from the first missile launch to the final aircraft impact. $1.8 billion worth of American-designed stealth technology now rests on the floor of the Persian Gulf in pieces too small to recover. This staggering financial loss, coupled with the complete destruction of such advanced assets, represents an unprecedented blow to a modern air force, particularly given the F-35's touted invulnerability against conventional threats. It challenges the very premise of high-cost, low-observable platforms, and in the aftermath, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, which had been operating in support range of Israeli operations, executed an emergency repositioning away from Iranian anti-ship missile range. This movement was so rapid that it left Allied planners across the region with no ambiguity about what the maneuver signaled. The United States Navy retreated. I have spent 3 decades studying air combat, and I can tell you without qualification that what happened over Hormuz represents the single most consequential air-to-air engagement result since the end of the Cold War. Not because 12 aircraft were lost. Losses of that scale have occurred in other conflicts, but because of which aircraft were lost, how they were lost, and what their loss reveals about the actual survivability of stealth technology against an adversary with modern integrated air defense systems and the operational discipline to use them correctly. The F-35 was sold to Congress, to Allied nations, and to the American public as an aircraft whose stealth characteristics made it effectively immune to legacy air defense systems. Iran just demonstrated that this claim was always more marketing than reality. The pilots, 11 of whom ejected successfully and were recovered by U.S. Navy search and rescue assets operating at significant risk inside the engagement zone, are now being debriefed in a process that will take weeks and produce a classified after-action report that almost certainly will not be released publicly. But the operational facts visible from open-source analysis are sufficient to draw conclusions that the Pentagon will find extremely uncomfortable. Iran's integrated air defense network, combining Russian-supplied S-300 and S-400 systems with indigenous radar and fire control capabilities, tracked, engaged, and successfully intercepted a stealth aircraft platform that American doctrine assumed would be able to operate with near impunity in a contested environment. That assumption is now operationally disproven, and every nation that purchased F-35s based on that assumption is conducting an urgent reassessment. What we need to understand from this engagement comes down to 3 questions whose answers will reshape air power doctrine for a generation. How did Iranian air defenses detect, track, and engage aircraft specifically designed to be invisible to the radar systems Iran operates? And what does that capability imply about every other stealth platform currently in service? Why did the engagement unfold so rapidly that neither electronic warfare support nor additional fighter cover could prevent the losses? And what does this say about the actual survivability of strike packages in modern air defense environments? And why did the U.S. Navy, with all its capability, all its firepower, all its institutional confidence, choose retreat over escalation in the immediate aftermath of watching 12 Allied aircraft go down? Now, let us go through what happened step by step. Here is what is gone. 12 F-35 Adir fighters, the Israeli variant of the F-35A, modified with Israeli-specific avionics and weapons integration, operating as 3 4-aircraft flights in a strike package directed against targets on Iran's southern coast near Bandar Abbas. The strike package was part of a larger operation intended to degrade Iranian naval and coastal defense capabilities that had been restricting Israeli freedom of movement in the region. The aircraft were approximately 40 nautical miles north of the Strait of Hormuz, having penetrated Iranian airspace at low altitude to minimize radar detection when the engagement began. The Iranian air defense response initiated at 0347 local time with the simultaneous launch of multiple surface-to-air missiles from sites assessed as S-400 batteries, positioned along the coastal defense corridor. The first two F-35s were hit within 90 seconds of launch warning. Both aircraft suffered catastrophic damage consistent with proximity-fused warhead detonation and went down immediately. The pilots of both aircraft ejected successfully. The remaining 10 aircraft of the strike package attempted evasive maneuvers and activated electronic countermeasures. But within the next 4.5 minutes, 10 additional aircraft were engaged and hit. The final tally: 12 aircraft destroyed, 11 pilots recovered, 1 pilot killed in the ejection sequence. From an analytical standpoint, the speed of this engagement is the first data point that demands explanation. 6 minutes from first launch to final impact means the Iranian fire control system was tracking these aircraft continuously, not intermittently, not with periodic updates, but continuously enough to generate firing solutions and guide interceptors to impact against targets that were actively maneuvering in 3 dimensions. Stealth aircraft are designed to defeat continuous track by reducing their radar cross-section to levels that make sustained lock-on extremely difficult. What happened over Hormuz indicates that Iranian systems were maintaining track quality coefficient for weapons employment throughout the entire engagement window. The second critical data point is the engagement range. Initial assessments, based on the known locations of Iranian S-400 batteries and the debris field location, suggest engagement ranges between 80 and 120 kilometers, well within the performance envelope of the 48N6 and 40N6 missiles that the S-400 system employs. But at ranges where stealth characteristics were supposed to degrade radar performance enough to prevent reliable track. The fact that multiple aircraft were successfully engaged at these ranges indicates that Iranian radar systems were detecting and tracking the F-35s at performance levels comparable to what those same systems would achieve against non-stealth aircraft. That is the operational definition of stealth defeat. The third data point, and this is where it gets particularly uncomfortable for Western air power doctrine, is that the Iranian engagement was not a lucky shot or a single isolated success that can be explained away as circumstantial. 12 aircraft, 3 separate flights, operating across a geographic area spanning multiple defense sectors, all successfully engaged within the same 6-minute window. That level of coordination and weapons effectiveness does not happen by accident. It reflects an integrated air defense network operating at a level of technical proficiency and operational discipline that American intelligence assessments had not credited Iran as having achieved. Here is how it happened. The Iranian Integrated Air Defense System combines multiple radar types operating at different frequencies. VHF early warning radars, which are less affected by stealth shaping than the higher frequency radars that stealth aircraft are optimized against, providing initial detection and cueing. X-band fire control radars then take over for precision tracking and weapons guidance. The combination creates a layered detection architecture where even if the stealth characteristics successfully reduce detection range for some radars, other radars operating at different frequencies still maintain sufficient track quality to cue the fire control system. Once the fire control radars have a general location to search, provided by the VHF early warning net, they can employ track-while-scan modes and signal processing that extract stealth targets from background noise at ranges that doctrine assumed were safe. The Israeli pilots, operating under the assumption that their stealth characteristics provided a significant detection range advantage, had penetrated to within engagement range of an air defense network that had been tracking them for significantly longer than they believed. When the missile launches began, the geometry was already unfavorable. The aircraft were within the no-escape zone of the interceptors before they received warning, and their evasive options were constrained by terrain, mission profile, and the simple physics of how quickly an aircraft can maneuver out of the engagement envelope of a missile already in flight toward it. What concerns me most about this engagement, and I need to be direct here, is not that a specific aircraft was shot down. Aircraft get shot down. That is the nature of air combat. What concerns me is the systematic nature of the failure, and what it reveals about the gulf between stealth as it is marketed and stealth as it performs against a capable, well-organized adversary. The F-35 program consumed over $400 billion in development costs and represents the single largest defense acquisition program in human history. The central premise of that program, the justification for the cost, the complexity, and the decades of development time, was that stealth technology would provide such a significant survivability advantage that the aircraft could operate in contested airspace with acceptable loss rates, even against modern air defense systems. This immense investment was predicated on a technological edge that now appears significantly blunted. Historically, major defense programs have faced cost overruns, but rarely has the foundational strategic assumption been so thoroughly challenged by a single operational event, forcing a re-evaluation of decades of doctrine. Every variant of the F-35 was designed around that premise. The Israeli F-35-1 in particular was marketed as capable of conducting strike operations deep into denied territory against the most sophisticated threats. Iran just demonstrated that this premise does not hold when the air defense system is competently designed and professionally operated. The S-300 and S-400 systems that Iran operates were specifically developed by Russia with stealth defeat as a primary design requirement. Lessons learned from observing U.S. stealth operations in Serbia, Iraq, and Syria. The VHF radar components of these systems operate at wavelengths where stealth shaping is significantly less effective than it is against the X-band and higher frequency radars that most air defense systems historically relied upon. The Russians understood and designed for the physics problem that stealth presents. You can shape an aircraft to reduce its radar cross-section at specific frequencies, but you cannot make it invisible across all frequencies simultaneously. The Iranian integration of these Russian-supplied systems with their own indigenous radar and command and control architecture produced a layered defense that exploited the fundamental limitation of stealth technology. The VHF radars detected the F-35s at ranges sufficient to cue the higher frequency fire control systems into the correct search volume. Once cued, those fire control radars, even if they could not maintain continuous track at maximum range, had enough intermittent track data to generate weapons launch solutions. The 48 N-6E missiles used by the S-300 PMU-2 and the more capable 40 N-6 missiles employed by the S-400 have their own onboard active radar seekers that activate in the terminal phase of flight. Once the missile is close enough for its seeker to acquire the target directly, the stealth characteristics of the target become largely irrelevant. The missile is close enough that even a reduced radar cross-section is more than sufficient for lock-on and guidance to impact. I have reviewed the technical literature on stealth extensively, and I can tell you that none of this should be surprising to anyone who understands the technology honestly rather than as it is presented in marketing materials. Stealth does not make an aircraft invisible. It reduces detection range, which is valuable, but that value is conditional on the threat system being unable to compensate through other means. Against an integrated air defense network with multiple sensor types, command and control architecture that fuses data from different sources, and weapons with the kinematic performance to reach out to the ranges where detection does occur, stealth's value proposition degrades significantly. The F-35's electronic warfare suite, which is supposed to provide an additional layer of survivability through jamming and deception, appears to have been ineffective in this engagement. Iranian air defense operators reported no significant degradation in track quality during the engagement sequence, suggesting either that the electronic warfare systems were not employed effectively or that Iranian systems have jamming resistance capabilities that the electronic warfare suite was not designed to overcome. Either possibility is deeply problematic from a force survivability standpoint. The comparison with Iranian capabilities is instructive and deeply uncomfortable for the Western defense establishment. Iran built its integrated air defense network under comprehensive sanctions that prevented the import of Western technology and severely constrained access to advanced components. What they built through a combination of Russian system integration, indigenous radar development, and decades of careful study of how to defeat stealth is now demonstrably effective against the most advanced tactical aircraft the United States produces. The cost differential is staggering. The 12 F-35s lost in this engagement represent $1.8 billion in direct aircraft replacement cost. not counting the decades of training invested in the pilots or the operational disruption caused by the loss. The Iranian missiles that achieved those kills cost a fraction of that amount, likely under $30 million for the entire engagement's missile expenditure. This is the cost exchange mathematics of modern air defense, and it is not favorable to the attacker. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group's repositioning away from the Iranian coast in the immediate aftermath of this engagement is, in my professional judgment, the single most strategically significant American naval movement in the Middle East since the end of the Cold War. This retreat, rather than a show of force, marks a profound shift in regional power dynamics. It signals a new American calculus regarding acceptable risk, diverging sharply from historical precedents where U.S. naval assets would typically project strength or retaliate in similar circumstances, thus redefining the perceived limits of American intervention. Having served in environments where these decisions are made, I know the calculus that goes into them. When 12 Allied aircraft are shot down in a 6-minute engagement, the immediate institutional response is to identify what went wrong and what additional support could have prevented it. In this case, the answer to that question was deeply uncomfortable. Additional carrier aviation support would not have prevented these losses because the Iranian air defense network that achieved the kills was operating from positions inside Iran's own territory, heavily protected by overlapping defense sectors and beyond the range at which carrier strike packages could have effectively suppressed them without accepting losses that the operational situation did not justify. The alternative, direct American strikes against Iranian air defense positions in retaliation for the F-35 losses, would represent an escalation across a threshold that Washington has been extremely careful not to cross throughout this conflict. Striking targets inside Iranian territory in direct response to Iranian defensive actions against Israeli aircraft. Conducting strikes inside Iranian airspace is legally and politically complex in ways that no military operation can solve. It transforms the conflict from one in which the United States is supporting an ally to one in which the United States is directly at war with Iran. That transformation carries consequences for oil markets, for the security of American bases across the region, for the stability of governments friendly to American interests that exceed what the current political environment in Washington can sustain. The Pentagon made the assessment that those consequences were not worth accepting for the operational situation as it existed. The repositioning of the Eisenhower Strike Group was the operational expression of that assessment. The message transmitted by that repositioning to Tehran, to Tel Aviv, to every regional government watching was unmistakable. American support for Israeli operations has limits. And one of those limits is the willingness to escalate into direct conflict with Iran in response to Israeli losses suffered while conducting offensive operations inside Iranian airspace. The strategic cost of that message being transmitted will compound over time. Israel's operational planning for the duration of this conflict has assumed that American carrier presence provides both direct support and an escalation backstop. That if Israeli operations encounter difficulties they cannot solve independently, American power will be available to assist. That assumption is now qualified in ways it was not before. Tehran demonstrated that it can impose significant costs on Israeli air operations, and Washington demonstrated that it will not automatically accept the risks required to prevent those costs from being imposed for other American allies across the region and globally. The implications are being processed in real time. If the United States will not escalate to protect Israeli F-35s operating in support of an Israeli strategic campaign, what level of support can other allies expect in contingencies that matter to them? The confidence that has sustained American alliance structures, the belief that American commitment is sufficiently reliable, that aligning with Washington is the rational security choice, has just absorbed a data point that complicates that calculation significantly. One side lost 12 aircraft in 6 minutes. The other side successfully defended its airspace against the most advanced tactical aircraft available to its adversary. The difference between those outcomes is not primarily technological. The F-35's stealth characteristics are real and measurable. Iranian air defense systems are sophisticated, but not magical. The differences are in how capability is generated and sustained. Iran's integrated air defense network was built over decades under conditions of enforced isolation from Western technology and comprehensive economic sanctions. Every radar, every command node, every operator training program was developed with the understanding that no external support would be available, and that the system would have to function against adversaries with significant technological advantages. That constraint forced a design philosophy centered on redundancy, adaptability, and the intelligent exploitation of the adversary's assumptions about their own capabilities. The F-35, by contrast, was developed within a defense acquisition system that assumed technological superiority as a given and that optimized for performance against threat systems that were understood through intelligence collection rather than operational testing. The aircraft's stealth characteristics are optimized against specific radar frequencies. Its electronic warfare capabilities are designed to counter specific threat systems as those systems were understood at the time of the aircraft's development. When confronted with a threat architecture that combines systems in ways that American intelligence had not fully characterized and operated them with a level of professionalism that doctrine had not credited, the advantage disappeared. The Israeli pilots who ejected over Hormuz are by all accounts among the most highly trained and proficient aviators in the world. They operated their aircraft correctly, according to doctrine and training. The failure was not pilot error. The failure was in the assumptions embedded in the doctrine itself. Assumptions about the survivability of stealth platforms in contested environments that this engagement has now disproven operationally. What strikes me about Iran's performance in this engagement is the quality of operational discipline required to achieve the result they achieved. Integrated air defense is extraordinarily complex. Multiple radar types, multiple missile systems, operators distributed across defensive sectors, all requiring coordination and information sharing in real time under conditions where the adversary is actively attempting to disrupt your sensors and communications. Executing that at the proficiency level required to achieve 12 kills in 6 minutes against maneuvering stealth targets is not something that happens without years of training, regular exercises, and an institutional culture that prioritizes competence over appearance. My assessment of where this leads is that we are witnessing the end of an era in air power doctrine. The era in which stealth technology provided such a significant advantage that air forces could plan operations on the assumption that stealth platforms could operate in contested airspace with acceptable survivability. That assumption is no longer operationally valid against adversaries with modern integrated air defenses and the proficiency to employ them effectively. Every nation that purchased F-35s, and that list includes most NATO members, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, is now conducting an urgent reassessment of their air campaign planning. If the F-35 is not survivable against Iranian air defenses operating Russian-supplied systems, what does that imply about survivability against Russian air defenses operating in defense of Russian territory? What does it imply about survivability against Chinese air defenses in a Taiwan scenario? The questions cascade, and the answers are uniformly uncomfortable for the air forces that structured their modernization around the F-35 as their primary strike platform. In Moscow, the validation of Russian air defense technology against the most advanced American tactical aircraft is being absorbed, with satisfaction that will be expressed quietly in diplomatic channels rather than through public celebration. Russia's defense export prospects for the S-400 system have just received the most effective marketing demonstration imaginable. Every nation currently considering air defense modernization now has operational proof that Russian systems can defeat American stealth. The strategic value of that demonstration extends far beyond the immediate sale of additional systems. In Beijing, the operational lessons from Hormuz are being studied with particular intensity. China's air defense architecture incorporates systems conceptually similar to the Russian approach: multiple radar types, including VHF early warning systems, integration across sensor types, emphasis on redundancy and survivability. The confirmation that this approach can achieve operationally significant results against F-35s validates Chinese defensive planning and provides confidence that their own airspace can be defended against the primary strike platform that would be employed against them in a conflict scenario. For the United States, the strategic recalibration required by this engagement will take years and consume resources that the current defense budget was not structured to provide. The F-35 program cannot be abandoned. Too much has been invested. Too many Allied air forces are dependent on it. Too much of American tactical air power has been structured around it. But the operational employment doctrine for the aircraft must be fundamentally revised to account for the survivability limitations that Hormuz revealed. That revision will constrain options, increase costs, and require accepting that air superiority in contested environments is more difficult and more expensive to achieve than the stealth revolution promised. The broader shift toward a genuinely multipolar international system receives its most concrete military validation from this engagement. A sanctioned regional power operating Russian-supplied air defense systems, integrated with indigenous capabilities, successfully defended its airspace against the most advanced tactical aircraft available to the world's preeminent military alliance. That outcome is not an anomaly. It is a data point in a larger pattern that confirms the diffusion of military capability away from exclusive possession and toward a more distributed structure where regional powers can defend their territory effectively against adversaries with significant technological advantages. In 30 years of studying air combat, I have watched technological advantages appear, persist for a time, and then erode as adversaries adapt. Stealth was always going to follow that pattern. What happened over Hormuz accelerated the timeline in a way that defense planners were not prepared for. 12 F-35s gone in 6 minutes, $1.8 billion erased from the Israeli Air Force inventory. The U.S. Navy repositioning away from the engagement zone rather than escalating in response. These are not small events. They are the operational markers of a transition in the fundamental structure of air power. The next phase of this is already unfolding.